The dust was a shroud, gritty and thick, coating her tongue and lungs with the taste of defeat. It swirled around her ankles, stirred by the scuffing boots of the men who had brought her here. She stood in the biting wind, the prairie stretching endlessly, a vast, empty canvas that mirrored the hollow ache in her chest. They had spoken of property, of transactions made and debts settled. But their eyes saw only weariness and despair where a woman should have been. The air was thin, sharp with the scent of sagebrush and cold earth, carrying the distant lowing of cattle, another form of livestock in this unforgiving land. Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, a constant tremor beneath her skin. Her name was Eleanor, but they had called her the girl, the chattel, reducing her existence to a brutal necessity, a burden shuffled from one failing hand to another. She was 22, and her life felt already over, bartered away like a worn saddle or a lame horse. Her new owner, they said, was a rancher named Silas Blackwood, a man known for his solitude and the unforgiving efficiency with which he carved a living from this harsh landscape. The men who delivered her spoke of him in hushed tones, a man of few words and fewer friends. They warned her to be obedient, to know her place, before leaving her standing alone as their wagon rumbled away, swallowed by the horizon. Silas Blackwood emerged from the low-slung cabin as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges. He was tall, gaunt, his face weathered into sharp angles, eyes the color of faded denim beneath the brim of his hat. He didn't approach directly, instead stopping a dozen yards away, observing her with an unervingly still gaze. There was no warmth in his expression, no hint of welcome, but neither was there the leering cruelty she had come to expect from men who held power over her. His silence stretched, heavy and absolute, broken only by the relentless wind. She waited, arms wrapped around herself against the chill that seeped not just into her bones, but into her very soul. What would he demand? What indignities would this new life hold? Her mind raced, a whirlwind of desperate possibilities and crushing inevitability. He finally moved, a slow, deliberate stride. He stopped before her, and for a long moment, he simply looked at her, taking in her dirt-stained dress, her chapped hands, the terror in her eyes. His silence was different from the men who had brought her. It felt less like judgment and more like an impenetrable wall. "Cabin," he finally said, his voice low and rough, like stones grinding together. It was not an invitation, but an order. He didn't wait for her to respond, turning and walking back towards the cabin without another word. Eleanor hesitated for only a second. There was nowhere else to go. She followed, her steps uncertain, the dust clinging to her skirts, each grain a tiny weight holding her down. The cabin was spare, clean, smelling of wood smoke and leather. A single room served as kitchen, living space, and bedroom. A narrow cot was pushed against one wall. "Yours," he stated, gesturing towards it. Then he turned his back and began preparing a meal over the small stove. The silence descended again, thick and oppressive, yet somehow less actively menacing than the silence of men who plotted harm. She sat on the edge of the cot, feeling utterly adrift in this man's world, a world built of silence, solitude, and the enduring strength of the prairie. Days bled into weeks, marked only by the relentless rhythm of the sun rising and setting, and the ceaseless cycle of chores. Eleanor learned the quiet, back-breaking work of the ranch. Hauling water from the well, tending the small garden patch, mending fences alongside Silas, her hands growing calloused and strong. He spoke rarely, his instructions brief and to the point. He didn't offer comfort or sympathy, but he didn't inflict cruelty either. It was a neutrality she had never known, a lack of malevolent intent that, in its own way, felt like a fragile sort of mercy. She watched him, observed the quiet competence of his movements, the way he handled the horses with a firm, almost gentle touch, the patient resilience with which he faced the endless challenges of the land. He was a man shaped by solitude and the unforgiving demands of survival, his silence not emptiness, but a kind of self-sufficiency. He ate his meals in silence, sitting across the rough-hewn table from her, his gaze often fixed on the window, on the vast expanse outside. He didn't share stories, didn't ask about her past, and she offered nothing. The past was a cage she was desperate to leave behind. The present was this fragile existence, balanced on the edge of his unspoken will. One evening, a storm rolled in, sudden and fierce, battering the cabin with wind and rain. Fear, sharp and primal, seized her. She had known storms before, but alone here, with only this silent stranger, it felt different, more terrifying. She flinched at each crack of thunder, her breath catching in her throat. Silas didn't acknowledge her fear directly. Instead, he rose, went to the window, and simply watched the storm. After a moment, he turned and stoked the fire, adding another log. The simple act, practical and grounding, spoke louder than any words. He wasn't going to coddle her, but he wasn't going to let the fire die either. He was just enduring, expecting her to do the same. A quiet understanding began to form between them, not through conversation, but through shared tasks, shared meals, shared endurance of the elements. She saw his quiet strength, the integrity in his labor. He saw, perhaps, her own burgeoning resilience, the way she met the demands of the ranch without complaint, the quiet determination in her eyes. One day, mending a fence far from the cabin, they saw riders approaching. 3 of them dusty and rough-looking. As they drew closer, Eleanor recognized one of them, a man from the town where she had been sold. Her blood ran cold. They had come back. The fear returned, potent and suffocating, and she instinctively moved closer to Silas. He stopped his work, his body language shifting, becoming still, alert. He didn't draw a weapon, but his hands, resting loosely by his sides, looked ready. The riders pulled up, grinning, their eyes lingering on Eleanor with a predatory gleam. "Well now, Blackwood," the leader drawled. "Didn't reckon you had company." His gaze flicked to Eleanor. "Heard you acquired some stock. Changed hands again, did she?" His implication was clear, degrading. Eleanor felt herself shrink, the old shame washing over her. But then she felt Silas shift beside her, a subtle movement, but it felt like an entire mountain shifting into place. Silas Blackwood stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of Eleanor. His expression remained unreadable, but the air around him seemed to hum with a quiet intensity. "She's mine," he said, his voice low, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an absolute finality that cut through the dry prairie air. The leader of the riders chuckled, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "Property, eh? Always knew you were a practical man, Silas. But maybe we could discuss terms? She looked like she might fetch a bit more than you paid for her. Or maybe just borrow her for a while." His eyes fixed on Eleanor again, and she recoiled, the old terror gripping her. This was what she was in their eyes. A thing to be bought, sold, used. But Silas didn't move. He simply stood there, a silent, immovable force between her and their crude intentions. "She's not for sale," Silas stated. His hand moved slightly, resting near the worn handle of the knife she knew he carried. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it was a clear signal. A line drawn in the dust. The air grew tight, thick with unspoken threats. The riders exchanged glances. They saw the implacable stillness in Silas, the quiet promise of violence that lay beneath his calm exterior. They knew his reputation, his solitude, the fact that he would have nothing to lose in a confrontation, unlike men with families or reputations to uphold. The leader's grin faltered. He spat in the dust. "Fine. Have it your way, Blackwood." For now, he reined his horse around. The other 2 followed, casting resentful glances back at Eleanor before riding away, their laughter fading into the wind. Eleanor sagged, the tension draining out of her, leaving her weak and trembling. She looked at Silas, truly looked at him, seeing not just the stoic rancher, but the man who had just wordlessly, calmly, placed himself in harm's way for her. He hadn't asked why they wanted her, hadn't demanded an explanation of her past. He had simply defended his ground, and in doing so defended her. He turned then, his gaze meeting hers. For the first time, she saw something flicker in those faded denim eyes, a quiet acknowledgement, perhaps even a hint of respect. "They won't come back," he said, his voice soft, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the hardness she usually heard. It was a promise, and she believed him. In that moment, standing in the vast, empty prairie, Eleanor felt a shift within her. The fear hadn't vanished entirely, but it no longer defined her. Something else had taken root, something stronger, quieter. Resilience. Dignity. She was not just Chattel. She was Eleanor. The sun was setting again, casting long shadows across the ranch. Eleanor stood outside the cabin, the wind still biting but no longer feeling like an enemy. It was just the wind, part of the landscape, part of the life she was now building piece by painstaking piece. The incident with the riders had changed things, subtly but profoundly. Silas spoke perhaps one extra sentence a day, a quiet observation about the weather or the cattle. He no longer seemed to watch her with mere observation, but with a kind of quiet companionship. She, in turn, no longer saw him as just her owner, but as a partner in this shared struggle against the land's indifference and the world's cruelty. There were no grand pronouncements, no declarations of affection. Their bond was forged in shared silence, mutual respect, and the unspoken understanding that they had found in each other a refuge from the storm outside. She had arrived a broken thing, stripped of agency and hope, treated as a possession. She was still dirt-stained, still weary, but she stood taller. The work had strengthened her body, and the quiet, unexpected safety of this place had begun to mend her spirit. She had faced the abyss and found a way back, not through escaping her circumstances, but through finding her own strength within them. Silas emerged from the cabin, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He handed one to her. Their fingers brushed, a brief electric contact. He didn't pull away, and neither did she. They stood side by side, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. The silence between them was different now. It was comfortable, shared. "Hard winter coming," he murmured, his gaze on the distant peaks. She replied, her voice steady. "It would be hard. Life always would be in this land." But she wasn't facing it alone anymore. She wasn't Chattel. She was Eleanor, standing on her own 2 feet, on land she had helped to work, beside a man who saw her, truly saw her. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't look entirely bleak. She had been sold, yes, but she had not been broken. And in the quiet strength found in this desolate place, she had finally, truly, been set free.